Welcome to the Startup Gamers Podcast, featuring great game designers and their games. Now, here's your host, Matt Ballard.
Hello and welcome to Startup Gamers Podcast. I am your host, Matt Ballard. Startup Gamers is brought to you by Tabletop Torch, your tabletop gaming guide. Visit www.tabletoptorch.com and sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss any of the great interviews and articles we have for you each and every week. The party game of the week is Balderdash. In Balderdash, each players take turns being the dasher. The dasher picks a word from the card and writes down the correct definition on a piece of paper. All of the other players then write what they believe is the correct definition to that word. They then hand their paper to the dasher. Players are rewarded points if they write the correct definition down. Then each definition is read aloud and players vote for the definition they believe is correct. Points are awarded for correct guesses, and other players get points if someone else guesses their definition. As the game plays, each player moves their pawn around the game board, and the first player to reach the end wins. Balderdash is a great family and large gathering game that is a surefire hit at your next party. Buy the game now through the link in our show notes, and you'll get the game through Amazon, and at no additional cost to you, we get a small percentage of the sale to help keep this podcast free. Today's featured game is The Shattered from INDE Games. The Shattered is a tabletop role-playing game where players are survivors living in a world rebuilding after a terrible cataclysm. We've got Alex, Corey, and Josh here today to tell us all about the broken world of Fenris. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good. How about you?
Good, thanks. So, who do I have the pleasure of speaking with today?
I'm Josh Pietrzakowski. I'm the development lead on Shattered.
I'm Alex Robb. I helped with some of the math and system stuff.
I'm Corey Conrad. I'm lead editor on the project right now.
Awesome. So, what games have you guys been playing lately?
I've been playing a lot of Iron Kingdoms lately, and I dabble in a few others, but that's been my tabletop love affair for the past year or so.
Nice. Are you planning on picking up Unleashed?
Absolutely. It's probably one of my favorite tabletop games to date, and the system is so easy. And any of these other guys will tell you that I hate playing casters, especially in D&D. And this game, I picked up a caster, and I was off and rolling, and it was actually fun for me, and I actually look forward to it. So, yeah, it's up there on my list.
That's awesome.
Myself, I've been playing some Warhammer 40k, primarily the Black Crusade.
Nice.
I just love how the system is very dark and twisted, and for some things in Shattered, I pull a little bit from there, but not too much.
What army do you usually play?
It's mostly the RPG. I haven't gotten into the miniatures or any of those armies. I played one army one time, and pretty sure I mopped the floor with one of my friends.
Oh wait, Black Crusade is is that the role-playing game where you play as Chaos?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, how is that? Is that fairly easy to pick up, or is it more rules heavy than most games? I know of them, but I haven't played any of them yet.
I'd say the rule system is pretty straightforward. However, I play an altered rule system that one of my friends created, but it's fairly along the same lines, just a little bit different dice rolls. I enjoyed the system itself, and for me, not ever having touched any of the Warhammer 40k universe, I could jump right in, and it was pretty smooth for me.
That's awesome.
I guess games I'm playing right now. I'm still pretty big on League of Legends right now. I won't lie. Other than that, I think I'm going through some Telltale games right now with Wolf Among Us.
Nice.
I just finished The Walking Dead Season 2 and Payday 2 whenever we can get the guys together.
Very nice. Now, what games really got you guys into playing tabletop games?
For me, it actually started with the with Warhammer 40K, with miniatures and all that stuff. I jumped in with Space Marines like a lot of people do, and then I went to Chaos and started playing Tau, and I don't play so much anymore. Now I'm just into modeling, but that kind of got me closer to tabletop RPGs and such, and then I jumped in, as a lot of people do, with D&D and Pathfinder, and then I started venturing out from there.
Nice. Now, when you played 40K, you said you played Space Marines mostly, and then Chaos?
I started with Space Marines. That didn't last very long, and then I jumped into Chaos after that.
Very nice. How about you other guys? What games got you into tabletop?
Well, I started playing with Star Wars way back in the day, probably 25 years ago. Show my age.
Can't go wrong with Star Wars.
But I was playing that for a little bit, and I was just like, hey, this is a pretty fun thing to do. I get to use my imagination and just do whatever with my characters within a world that I was already familiar with. So I kind of ventured out from there. Of course, went to the old standby of Dungeons and Dragons, and then just started branching out from there.
Very nice.
I guess for tabletop games, the first one I ever played was Sam. It was Star Wars Saga Edition, but it spawned from a totally random conversation in college. We were talking about what happened if Luke Skywalker and Leia, they didn't survive the birth, for whatever reason. What would happen? How would the universe change? And we're like, man, we've got to make this a thing. And then we found out that there was a tabletop, basically D&D for Star Wars. So we found the rule set and we got it all together. We got everyone together, and we ended up playing that, and that was a lot of fun. I got to lead the Imperial side, and we had some friends running the light side, and it was just a blast.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Now, you guys are working on a game called The Shattered, which is currently funding on Kickstarter. What can you tell us about the background story and setting of this brand new role-playing game?
Well, the background story has a lot going on, but basically, the world roughly 3,000 years ago was utterly destroyed by a ritual of a death cult. It boiled the oceans away and replaced them with molten rock. It flipped entire continents over, killed untold millions of people on the planet, and set the planet into a 3,000-year winter, with clouds of ash and dust blocking out the sun and all that. And so when players jump into the game, they're coming in after mankind has slowly made its way out of hiding in caves and kind of being sent back to the Stone Age. They're slowly starting to make their way out, establish cities, trade, starting to research new technologies and stuff like that.
Now, The Shattered uses the multi-die system. Could you explain how MDS works?
The multi-die system is based on rankings of your primary stats like strength, toughness, intellect, and is combined with the combat and non-combat skills that we have devised, like melee, ballistic, hand-to-hand. It is broken into, each rank adds a set number of D4, D6, D8, progressing up as you increase rank. So from start, you begin with a 1d4, and that increases up to a 1d10 every 4 ranks. When you get to the 1d10, you then just go on and add 1d4. So it's 1d10 plus 1d4. And in that progression line until we got to our max ranks of 20, 5D tech.
Now, there are some very interesting races players can choose from in the Shattered. My personal favorite race is the Rekindled, which is individuals who upon death reconstructed segments of their old body through sheer force of will. What are some of the other races players can play as?
I guess just to piggyback right off what you said, my personal favorite to play thus far has been the vampires. I feel like we've come up with a very fresh take on them. They're not sparkly and they're not brooding aristocrats. They're very they're very much monsters, like they should have been always, in my opinion. Anyways, you can see in some of our art they have like a very unique aesthetic. And one thing I always like to draw attention to is the jaws in particular, and the fact that they have that ability to like unhinge their jaw to devour other creatures. And I love that.
Yeah, well, when I saw the art
so,
for that, I was like, wow, that looks amazing.
Oh, and I love it. And you have the vampires, obviously, and I think what's been most fun for me to play, for them at least, is a lot of their racial talents, because they get a lot of boons and buffs from like basically feeding and whatnot. But then you have the Shade. The Shade come from the Glass Forest, which is this crazy place of just like essentially like volcanic glass and stuff, and it's just razor sharp. And living in this deadly sort of area, they've learned to become very nimble, very agile people. And they're also known for their unique fact that they don't speak. Their only form of communication is telepathy. So they have no vocal cords of that sort. And so they're very off-putting to a lot of the other races. But they have a very unique skill set, which we might be able to talk about later, that was a lure, I guess, for the other races to bring them into kind of the fold of civilization. You have the Wretched, who receive the worst brunt of the whole thing, and they came out the most heavily mutated, and that's why they're called the Wretched. It's because they suffer through such severe mutations. And it's made them a very hardy people, and so they value strength above all things. And we haven't talked about it too much, but they have a very nomadic clan kind of society. For those who at least live outside of the primary societies, and so it's a very Sparta on the go kind of feel, or like Mad Max sort of thing almost.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really fun. What I was saying, the Rekindled, obviously, what you discussed. I really love this because they're less of a race and more like a case of being. Because, like you said, they basically just came back through sheer force of will, with a little sprinkling of magic on top. And so they're very. They have a lot of trouble with the rest of society because, I mean, how do you really handle somebody who isn't all of what they once were? And they're still alive, but they're not. It's
really, yeah.
Yeah, so you get into a lot of that when it comes to, I guess, trying to interact with society. And that's another thing that I really like about Shattered is that all these races trying to come together. You get a really interesting melting pot as everyone's trying to survive together. And with all these weird, I guess, lifestyles and livelihoods. You obviously have the humans. I don't want to say they're vanilla, but they're definitely, I guess, our base race, if you will. They're the ones who manage to survive the reckoning with the least amount of negative effects. But it's still made them a very hardy group of people, and they've adapted. They've changed. They're not even what would be considered normal for you or I. And some of that's buried in the racial traits, which have not been discussed yet on the Kickstarter. But it's definitely there, and it's definitely relevant to, I guess, gameplay. Have I missed any? I know I'm missing something. The Ellipse. The Ellipse are a very exciting race, in my opinion, because they're basically the descendants of those who were involved in the death cult. So it's their ancestors' involvement in the death cult changed them, both physically and mentally. And that's evident in the art, where you can see the form that was impressed upon them through the ritual. And because of this, anyone who ever sees their form shuns them, essentially. And in order to deal with this, they've actually developed, I think we called it the Psy Mask, and basically it's how they hide themselves from the other races, so that they're not outright, murdered in the streets or shunned in general. So theirs is it's a very precarious place because interacting with society, honestly, for them would be pretty much impossible, and so they've become very charismatic, deceitful creatures just to survive.
Nice.
Am I missing any, guys?
I think drones are the last ones.
Drones. Yep, and then drones. And drones are they're a holdover from the time before, and they're essentially living machines. I can't speak too much about the drones. I wasn't there when they were created, but correct me if I'm wrong, guys. A lot of the inspiration was from that Ghost in the Shell idea, the idea that at some point machines could cross that line between being man-made and being living. And so their whole history comes from the time before when they were servants to humanity, and their primary function was to maintain other machinery and equipment, and plays a big part of, I guess, what happened in the time before the Reckoning.
In addition to all the really cool races you guys have, characters are created using a classless system. Players have a set amount of XP they can spend on stats, skills, and what is the core of Shattered, talents. What are some of your favorite talents?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I mean, Lith can tell you the exact, so used to using internet tags. Alex can tell you the exact or a better number of how many talents we have, but I think one of my favorites is called the Insane Combatant, and it's a multi-tier talent, so you can buy multiple ranks of it, and each rank does something else, and basically it plays off of another system we have in the game that we haven't really gotten into yet on the Kickstarter. But it plays into the insanity system, and so the more points of insanity you've acquired, you get the more buffs you get from that. So, for example's sake, you have 4 points of insanity, you may get a +2 to your attack roll. Or a +2 to damage or something like that. And the more insanity you have, the more that bonus stacks up. Now, the catch is, with the way that insanity works, is that the more insanity you have, the more prone you are to failing a fear check. And fear is a whole other system that comes into that. But the more prone you are to failing a fear check and the more dangerous it becomes, the more insanity you have. So if you have really high insanity and have all this power, if something pops out and scares you, you could just die on the spot. At the worst possible scenario. But I mean that if you got high enough up there, that might be your only option if you failed the fear check. So I think that's my favorite.
Yeah, I'd say my favorite is Distortion. It's got several interesting things that you could build up on. Like, to start off, you start off with Slow Fall, which roughly reduces the speed the speed of rate that you're falling. Then you get you get Long Jump. You can increase your jump distance. It really starts getting awesome after rank 3. Where it gets Horizontal Wall Run, where you could just run straight up a wall for one of your move actions that you use.
That's awesome.
And it gets even better with Vertical Wall Run. And finally, you get Inversion, which basically lets you run on the ceiling.
That sounds awesome.
Oh, man, that's a hard one. There's a lot of good stuff.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, but I think, well, number one, I like the fact that we have race-specific talents that each of the races can take to really diversify them. And again, I will always go back to my vampire. I loved playing him so much. It was a good time. But what I did was there's one called Blood Drinker, which is pretty simple. Basically every time he feeds, I heal. And that comes through grappling. So the way I'd always play him is essentially just attack everyone, just head on, and just drink everyone's blood all the time. So I was constantly wrestling anything I could get my hands on, even if it was a bad idea, like poison slick enemies. I didn't care. I just wrestle it. It'll be okay. I'll heal through it. Yeah, and that's basically how. Oh, and it just made him like that constant tank character, and it was a lot of fun to play. And if it's not that, then it's got to be. We haven't talked about it too much, but Conviction, and it's our kind of like paladin, I guess you could say, or cleric, and how they call upon. Well, in our world, the elements have become the deities, or I guess you could say. That's what people worship in this time, after the Reckoning, 3,000 years. And so, based on the elements, you get certain abilities, but they'll have shared miracles. And so that whole thing, just as a talent set, I guess, is really awesome to me. Being able to heal your enemies, or heal, your friends, curse your enemies, buff your allies. Just that whole element is a lot of fun to me.
And if I could add on to what Corey said there, with Conviction, each element has its own foil. So, war versus peace, light versus darkness, that sort of thing. And each of those opposites play off of each other. So you have, if you find yourself in the presence of someone else who has a conviction opposite of yours, you have abilities that can trigger against them that will hinder their elemental abilities. I think one of them is like between water and fire. I think like if you inflict them with your faith in water, for lack of a better term, their blood starts to harden like water was running over molten rock. And they lose movement actions and they slow down and stuff like that. Wow. And you can really cripple your enemy with those kinds of abilities. So it's really neat how they all play together.
But it's a dual effect, so it goes both ways. When you're in their presence, they affect you with something, and you affect them in turn. So being around them is usually just best to just like call it a day and be like, all right, truce.
Now, something that was mentioned earlier that I'd like to touch on is mutations. What can you tell us about mutations that you'd find in the Wretched?
Well, mutations, first of all, are available to everyone. Any race can get them. Even the drones, we have a method that they can get access to mutations as well. Oh, nice. But every race can get them. The big thing with the Wretched is that they get them much more easily than everyone else. But some of the mutations that we have available, range from very simple things like gills or extra limbs, or some of the things you think of if you live near a nuclear plant or something. See frogs with extra eyes and that sort of thing. But we have further up the power scale, we have things like, my favorite to always talk about is, and I think I mentioned it in the Kickstarter video, is the chest burster, and it's just this giant mouth in your chest that you can open up and just like tackle something and devour it and restore your health and leave a bloody mess all over the place.
That's awesome.
Among plenty of other things, you have things like, another favorite of mine is the bioreactor, which you can is kind of like, we took the concept of bioluminescence that we see here in nature and kind of turned it into something that actually generates power. So they may have like this bioluminescent tumor on their body that they can interface with machines to power them, or unleash that raw energy and a bioengineered flamethrower or other effects as well. There's a lot of options in there.
Yeah, when I was reading through the playtest packet, I was like, bioreactor, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, and another thing to disclose is every race can get it, like you said, but sometimes there could be situations where you end up getting them not necessarily of your own free will. Like cancer. You don't just be like, you know what I want today? Cancer. That sounds like fun. But that can happen. You can end up with cancer. It's one of the mutations that's listed in like the first level, and anyone can get it. So there are a lot of negative ones and there are a lot of positive ones. But most of them just come with a trade-off. That's what we aimed for.
Nice. I think it was mentioned before, the boons and buffs system. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just the ability to basically conviction is one of the set of talents we have, but it comes from being a marshal. Basically, a marshal is someone who holds steadfast to the tenets of their particular faith, which is one of the elements that we've listed: fire, water, air, earth. Basically, people have recognized the sheer raw power of the world around them, and it's become essentially a religion or a cult, if you prefer. And so, basically, through their worship and through their piety, they gain the ability to use certain miracles. And as they become stronger marshals, essentially, as you level up your conviction, you gain access to more and more powerful miracles. Examples would include buffing your own attacks to add additional damage per strike, or giving yourself bonuses to almost seeing the future, essentially giving yourself bonuses to like dodging and evading incoming attacks. Those are just a couple examples, but there's a bunch of them. Anything from healing your allies to giving them almost like a haste effect, giving them additional actions, vigor through combat, things like that.
Nice. Now that we know about character creation, what are some of the horrors that these characters will be facing when they venture into the world of Fenris? Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you
Okay.
did.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Well, probably my favorite monster is the Scorn of All. It is a remnant that it's essentially a gigantic mountain of a worm. It's the size of a city. It tunnels and burrows and all of the destruction and lava. This thing literally just ignores it all and does what it does. From time to time, it will pop up and just wreak havoc around the area that it happens to be at. And most of the races of Fenris have come to the conclusion that they should just run from it or be swallowed into the chasm that it leaves behind.
Oh, wow.
There's some other ones that we have created. A lot of our remnant monsters and creatures are just that. They are remnants from a long ago age, and they, because of the reckoning, these gigantic creatures, or sometimes small creatures that just have so much raw power to them, have now come to be in the world of Fenris.
I'll leave one of our favorites to Conrad or Corey so he can talk about it. Okay, yeah, sorry, but bad habit.
No, it's fine.
I think one of my favorites that we don't bring up a whole lot. We talk about the Hangel, which Conrad may discuss, but one of my favorites is one we came up with a while ago. Is called it's a parasite called the sepsis. And it works a little similar to how you think of the alien chestburster, but once it gets in you, it just devours your insides, and you die. And then it bursts out of your rib cage and uses its tendrils to wraps its tendrils around your rib cage and uses your broken ribs as makeshift legs to hunt around for another for another victim. And so if you can imagine just like a half decayed corpse walking on its rib cage, like dragging its head behind itself through the streets looking for something to attack. It's a terrifying thought to me, but I absolutely love it.
Oh man, that sounds pretty intense.
Yep. All right. Well, since he brought it up, our kind of flagship monster, if you will, is the Hangel. It gets its name from the fact that basically it's hungry, and it's got a rumbly that only hands can satisfy. And for those of you who knows that video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Basically, it likes to... it'll eat just about anyone or anything living, but what it likes to do is keep the hands, and it keeps those severed hands and has kind of sewn them together, and has made wings out of just hands.
Oh, wow.
And so it's just this terrifying semi-human creature that flies around on the wings of hands and devours anything it finds. And it's literally just terrifying. We have some art. I don't know if we put it up on the Kickstarter yet, but if it's not, it really needs to be there because
That sounds terrifying.
it's some gorgeous art. Yeah,
It's around. We were gonna mention it in a update coming up soon, so people definitely get a chance to see it.
yeah, definitely. It definitely needs to be seen. It's actually if you look at the About Shattered, that very first picture we have, that's a small glimpse of it. If you look at it, you can actually see all the hands coming out its back. Yeah, it's not a fun thing to run into. It's definitely one of our stronger monsters. I guess in addition to that, some of them are more mundane monsters because we got to have something for every level.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to make something. I put my hand to monster creation, so I guess kind of a small shout out to myself. But I forgot what they named them now. It's been a little while. But essentially, the idea was that they were these race of small sloth-like creatures out in like some of the slightly forested areas, and true to sloth's nature, they just kind of hang around from trees and just chill.
Mm-hmm.
And how they catch their prey is basically by hanging there and waiting for something to come by, and they're camouflaged to match the branches of the trees. So whenever something comes by too close, they just drop one of their really long arms and catch you with like these hook-like claws and just pull you up into the tree. And nobody ever know you were gone.
Nice.
And so that was something I had a little fun, just kind of adding a little flavor to the world. Something could be slightly horrifying without making everyone shit their pants. Excuse my language.
Now, what kind of adventures will players go on in the Shattered?
Oh wow! When we designed the world and kind of came up with some of the locations and stuff like that, we really wanted to leave it open to the GM and the players to just come up with anything. We've left a lot of kind of little threads lying around that they could pick up and follow and turn into something. Mm-hmm. One thing, for example, is off the lava coast, if you will, in the Maw, which is the sea of molten rock. There's this giant open pit that's called the Lost Abyss, and it is just, if you were to imagine it, it's just this giant pit in the middle of this giant pool of lava, and lava's just flowing into it. No one really knows what it is, but some people, superstitious people, seem to believe that it's a door that opened to the underworld. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of play it off that way. It's actually one of our more interesting resurrection mechanics. So if a player dies, and they can't use one of the other methods to bring them back, they can decide, okay, well, let's go back and get them. So if to do that, they can derail their campaign to go get their friend back and fly into the Lost Abyss, fight through all of these dead things to go find the soul of their companion and drag them back out of hell, essentially.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. So, and of course, at risk of dying yourself and finding yourself in there. So it's could be an interesting threat for someone.
Now, what are some of the other ways you could bring a player back?
I don't know if Corey or Alex want to address any of them, but we've got a mechanic with the Marshal of Death, actually, that he can, if you're close to death, he can literally just like reach his hand into you and rip out your soul and store it in a glass vial.
Oh wow!
So and that can be used on allies or on enemies, whatever they happen to want at the time. But you can do that and put it in the jar and go find a
suitable host.
A suitable corpse, if you will, and then just transfer the soul back in. You'll take some points of insanity for that you can't really get rid of, but something like that probably would make you a little insane.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The other one that is kind of pseudo resurrection mechanic is our necromancer, who creates instead of necromancers in other games where they can summon legions of undead to do their bidding, the necromancer in Shattered just can bring one back to life, but they do it kind of in the way that Dr. Frankenstein did with Frankenstein's monster. They wander around and collect miscellaneous body parts and stitch them back together and then bring them back to life and can upgrade them as they themselves gain more power.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually what we call them. We call them stitches.
Nice.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. It's perfect.
So the Shattered features everything necessary to have a great game. Amazing art, solid mechanics, and an interesting setting. What was the design process like getting everything to come together?
Lith, if you
If
want to
I
take
may.
that, you can. Or Conrad. Yeah, sure.
Well, I was going to say, do you mind if we go back to that last question? Because, I mean, we
no,
talked
not at
about
all.
the Lost Abyss, but, I mean, there's so much more to this. I don't want people to feel like, oh, our friend died, we can go back. That's our only campaign.
Yeah, by all means.
Well, now I put myself on the spot, didn't I? All right.
This better be good.
The mechanic we've been working on a lot lately is actually working out airship combat, because that was something we definitely wanted to bring in. We're like, we can't respect ourselves as makers of a game that involves that steampunk and that biopunk without bringing something like that to the table. I mean, there's going to be plenty of opportunities for someone who wants to play like the pirates or the mercenaries, sailing the seven skies in this case, and stealing from the rich, or plundering, the world's treasures, what little may be left, or searching for remnants of the old world, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, airships have become very prevalent, so that's a very possible avenue for a GM to take their players.
Nice.
Anything from, say, a military campaign, like I said, to pirates or just, traders.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So to continue with that, we've been developing fluff and backstory for all of the city-states
Mm-hmm.
that are in Fenris, and we've actually set it up that right now the era that the player is plopped in is actually kind of on a precipice where there was just a war that was just fought. There's intrigue and scandal going all throughout each of the city-states. A tentative peace is being held right now. So GMs, if they wanted to, can pursue those avenues using with the history and lore that we have been developing, are currently still developing. We have all these ideas and everything, but some of the things we haven't got on paper. That's actually why we brought Corey on board, is because we were like, help! We've got the ideas, we just don't know how to put them into words. We need a wordsmith. But
Yeah.
there'll be ample for the players to do, and many avenues that can be taken. And I personally look very forward to seeing how other GMs, how other play groups have come up with stories and improved upon backstories that we've provided them, or just crazy adventures that they have. Heck, I'd even like to see just the adventure where all they do is sit in the city and manage a blacksmith shop for whatever reason. That would just still be more story that we can put into our already growing world.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
I guess if I could piggyback off of what he just said, just like
You sure
the
can.
world and how there's so many options. There's so much room for exploration, I guess. Like he said, we've got places, that's just ooze with history, and places that are just brand new. I mean, you've got, like Hell, the Grave City, which is basically, it's rumored where all the undead are coming from. Just supposedly they're just leaking out of this series of cliffs and such, where the city is built into. And you've got, all these cities, with Pulse on its basically at the beginning of an industrial revolution of sorts, industrial magic revolution, essentially. And you've got Lokran and Lannis, one with its fresh water, and so it's a constant source of intrigue, and the other with, all its scholars and people trying to find out what happened in the past and where we used to be, and people trying to move us forward with magic and science, and there's just so much room for growth in every direction, or just discovering the past. And the mysteries with the drones, and it's just there's so much room.
Mm-hmm. So the Shattered features everything necessary to have a great game. It's got amazing art, solid mechanics, and a very interesting setting. What was the design process like getting everything to come together?
Oh boy, I'll give anyone who's interested, listening to this, who's interested in getting this started, it is a long, difficult process, but absolutely worth it. When we started development on this, it was 4 years ago, and there were only 4 of us at the time. And it was just we had a name and a concept that we wanted a destroyed world, and we wanted to have some steampunk involved, and that was all we had. It really initially took a lot of research on our part to find what we wanted to do. We were all familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and using the D20 and all that, but we wanted to try and step out a little bit and find something different. And one of the guys on board then was very, very into running statistics and numbers, so he was doing all kinds of research on different die systems that were being used, different ways to calculate all this stuff. And then once you get the game developed, now you're looking at talking to artists, trying to find good art that'll really, sell your game. And
I just have to say, sorry to cut in, but the artwork for this game is phenomenal.
Right?
Oh, thank you. It's
some gorgeous art.
Yeah, we've really been. It's okay. We've really been fortunate to find some of the artists that we found. We've got Alex Chaudray, who over in France, who did all of our races, and that guy just every time I go up on his blog to see what else he's doing since he helped us with the races, just blows my mind every time. We've had some absolutely terrific artists.
Now, how did you, just for people who are trying to get into making their own game, how did you guys go about finding the artists?
We used now the site's not really around anymore. It closed down a few months ago, actually, sadly. But we used a site called CG Hub that had, it was just a place for artists and concept artists to gather and show off their work, and some of them would advertise that they would do work on commission and stuff like that. And so myself and everyone else in the team would just sit down on sites like that and just browse through art. We'd sit there for hours and just browse through pieces of art and show each other and be like, oh yeah, that one's perfect. Let's shoot them an email. And it's a numbers game, just like a lot of other things. We probably contacted maybe 100, 120 different artists, and we ended up working with 5 that have done the art we have so far, and it's been terrific. But it's a lot of work. It's a numbers game, and you just got to keep asking people.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that I find very interesting was, Corey, you went from being a playtester, then you moved up to a GM, then a contributor, and now you're the lead editor of The Shattered. Do you care to share your experiences with that series of events?
I love sharing this experience because it's been a freaking adventure. It's been great. When they first came to me, I actually was talking to Tex, or Philip Barus, who's also one of the lead developers. And he was my roommate back in college. So when he let me know that they were starting this up and they needed some playtesters, I was like, yeah, I'm in. So they gave me the rule set, and I got some guys together on base, and I was like, hey, I got some friends who want to try, get some feedback on this game. Let's try it. So I got a couple, I think it was 4 other guys together, nice. And I just played the playtest they gave me, and I loved it so much. that like I just couldn't stop talking to them about it and trying to give them ideas and feeding into that.
That's awesome.
And I think playing it actually is what really sold me, because leading these other people through the game, you always have those players who just want to do something off the wall. And so I had this guy. I'll never forget him because it was just so hilarious. He created an ellipse.
Probably one of my favorite stories.
Yes. We talk about it all the time. He created an ellipse, Marshal of Love. And so, I mean, the idea here then, it's this really contradictory thing, because the ellipse, they're known for like their deceit and their treachery, typically, and and disguising themselves. And so, he appears like just a human on the outside, and he's a marshal of love. So, I mean, he's like a beacon of hope for people. People can come to him, and he'll help them, that sort of thing. And just to top it off, he called it his whip of love. So I have this ellipse marshal of love running around with his whip of love, and he kind of became the team's like leader, just because he was able to talk his way through a bunch of their problems, and anything else he couldn't solve with his words, he'd whip it to death, essentially. And I laugh every time I think about it, and it just got me really deep into the world. And watching these guys play and watching how well the system worked, in my opinion, with the multi-die system and how it's scaled, that's what really drew me in, is how it definitely reflected a more realistic progression, because the scaling die and then adding more dice into your pool, and how your character grows, so you don't have that problem with like critical ones happening, where you have like this master swordsman who suddenly trips and impales himself on a critical one and stuff like that. You can see your character growing, so there comes a point where you don't fail, say a roll test of 4, because you're rolling 5 dice. It's just not possible. And so just that whole thing, the whole experience really drew me in. And the more I contributed, the more I was like, I wanted to know more. And so they gave me access to the documents, and I started poring over it. And I was like, hey, did you guys know you spelled this word wrong? Hey, I think you could word the sentence better. And they're like, you know what, here, just go ahead and edit it for us. And I was like, I would love to. And I disappeared. Nobody could talk to me for like a week unless it was about the documents, because I was just like deep. I was that guy in the library with 20 books around him. Nobody could talk to me unless it was about this. And they're like, calm down, slow down, the game's not ready yet, it's okay. And so yeah, I've learned to pace myself now, but every once in a while I just jump headlong in and just
That was probably a year ago, and we're still finding comments he made on things.
Just going through them all, it's like, oh, well, here's a comment that he made. Well, I guess we can address it now.
Now, what's it been like to run a Kickstarter campaign? Do you have any advice to game designers looking to launch a Kickstarter of their own?
Oh boy, I feel like I could, by the end of this thing, I feel like I could teach a college course on it. And just the first week alone, I was talking to the rest of the team. I was like, guys, I'm not recommending we do this, but if we quit and started over, we would do 10 times better. Like,
he did.
And
that was a thing.
Just lots of like little details that you don't notice ahead of time. And we poured over our Kickstarter page. We had a mock-up one that we had in Google Docs that we had all kinds of people look at, and people that had seen the game, people that hadn't seen the game, people that had never played a tabletop game, just look over it and tell us what they thought and tell us what they wish they would have seen and stuff like that. And even after all that work, there were still things after the fact that we were like, oh man, what were we thinking? Some of the stuff didn't make sense, so we got to go in and make adjustments. But the biggest thing I think that I've learned has been just transparency with the backers. Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of people, as you will get with any Kickstarter that gets attention. You'll get a lot of messages and things like that, and I feel like we've had a lot of good responses from all these people supporting us, because within half an hour of them sending us a message, we get something back to them. That in and of itself really, I think, helps not only gain more backers because they tell their friends that these guys are on point and they're paying attention to us, but it also helps maintain backers. And just with our Kickstarter alone, I think I've learned how much people like to build their own stuff and put it in the game.
Oh my god!
We had these $200 tiers, one to create your own monster and one to create your own NPC, and we talking about it weeks before. We were thinking, oh yeah, 10 of each sounds good. We're not expecting anyone to jump into those tiers a whole lot or anything. 10 should be fine, and by the end of the first week, we had upped each tier to 25 slots just because people kept asking for them.
There are going to be more slots. Come on, guys.
Yeah. We even had a guy who, was very generous and backed the new tier we added to create your own playable race for the game. And he emailed us and said, hey guys, I want to get the tier to create my own race, but I don't want to give up my NPC. Can I keep it? And so I think to anyone who's starting a Kickstarter, give backers an opportunity to put something in the game and you'll get a lot of terrific response.
Yeah, because I'd like to point out the NPC pledges are gone, all 25 of them, and there's only 5 left for the monster creator called the Lovecrafter. So I mean, they sold like hotcakes. They're gone.
And if someone moves around, you have a few people that'll switch tiers and stuff. If one of those slots frees up, it's gone in a second.
Yeah. I guess Alex, do you have anything?
Well, I'd say for advice, I'm pretty good at Excel, and I've actually built an entire sheet just for us that tracked everything that was going on in the Kickstarter, like what our tier cost was, what the cost was to actually make that tier, what the potential profit is, and just make sure that you're keeping track of all of that, because when it comes down to you're actually, if you don't already have your product, if you're using the Kickstarter like we are to actually put it all together and put it into book form, there's a lot that is involved in that to make sure that you get what you're asking for. Make sure that you have the correct bulk price, because you're just going to buy this en masse. And having that beforehand, we had kind of a simple one. And then once Kickstarter started, we were like, we need more. So I just created this entire mock-up, and it's now very easy for all of us to look like, okay, this is our projected, this is good, we can track all of this. And we don't need to worry about that later on down the road to be like, okay, how much money do we need to spend on all of this, and how much do we have left over? And no, it's all taken care of before the campaign will finish.
Yeah. And he's absolutely right. One of the things that you don't think about going into it is that you may be asking for $15,000, but once you get through getting rewards out to backers and stuff, you don't have $15,000 left.
Right.
So you need to make sure that you've balanced the cost of production of the rewards to what you actually need to get the product made. That's something that I feel is very easy to forget.
Yep, I guess the only thing I'd have to contribute to that is know your numbers. Make sure coming into it that you know how much your cost is going to be and how much profit you intend to make, or however you intend to divide up your money. Because that's been something that even once we got into the Kickstarter, we're like, oh wait, are our numbers right? And we had to double check things and triple check things, quadruple. The numbers have been a point of contention for a little while there. But we've got everything smoothed out, and so I mean, know your numbers, and I guess know what you're bringing to the table. I'm hoping here we'll be able to a mechanics update on the Kickstarter page, because there's a lot of stuff we haven't talked about. That's fundamentals of the world. We haven't talked about our magic. We haven't talked about the various mutations. We haven't talked about conviction too much. So there's a lot of stuff. We haven't talked about the fear system or psi. So we have a lot of elements that haven't really been brought to the table just yet, that I think people will definitely be more interested in once they know about. So I guess, like I said, just know what you're bringing to the table and what the people are looking for.
Nice. Great advice, guys. Now, lastly, for those who have yet to back the Shattered on Kickstarter, what is each one of your favorite things about the game that you think potential backers should know about?
I think the biggest thing, and this is actually kind of tied into one of our stretch goals, and we're still going to pursue it even if we don't reach that goal. It was our intent from the get-go of this game was to make it open and expandable for the player community. Mm-hmm. So, our intent was we're going to release this game, leave it open-ended enough to say, if a GM wants to write up a system that adds on to how Fear works, or if a player wants to write up a few new talents, they can go for it. And instead of just being like a homebrew section on a D&D forum somewhere, we wanted to make sure that players could post and archive and search for those new ideas and stuff like that. So we really want to get a database of all of this creativity that the community ultimately brings to the table. And we wanted to be able to go through that collection every few months and clean up, find some of the coolest things that are out there at the time and put them out and say, okay, guys, this is official community. This is an official community expansion, and everyone gets the PDF for free and that sort of thing.
Nice.
That now it's not just homebrew anymore. Now the community can make something and make it canon, if you will.
That's awesome.
Alex?
I'd say for me, one of the favorite things about this game is just the openness of it. We have one XP system that you can take that raw number that you get and put it into anything as long as you meet the requirements, the prerequisites for that talent, that skill, that what have you, and just be like, yep, I'm going to grab that. So you could be spending all of your XP into our magic system and then decide, well, I think conviction looks pretty cool, so I'm going to start dumping into that. And you can do both of them whenever you feel like.
Yeah. I guess if I could, I'd say everything. If that was an option. But I guess barring that, I'll settle for two things. One is the world. Just that it has that really gritty sense once you get into the books and everything of a world like people are just getting to that point where they're finally starting to recuperate after that big loss. And so you've got people struggling, but you've also got a lot of really big advancements happening at the same time. And so you start to see this stretch, between the impoverished and I guess the world advancing and trying to keep up with everything that's changing. And on top of that, I guess our system, how free and fluid it is, everything from the MDS, the multi-die system, to the range of talents and how you're not locked into anything. You don't have to be, a black mage or a cleric or a warrior. Mm-hmm. You can be, a fist-fighting thief who knows illusion magic and uses that to sneak into doors undetected. We've got so many options for stuff like that. And I'm really excited to see what sorts of combinations people come up with once they have their hands on the full book.
Yeah, that whole classless system, I'm very excited about that and all the combinations
yes.
you're able to create with it.
We're glad to hear that. If I could add one more thing that is, I feel, I'd want backers to know about ahead of time, is, so much so far. We've talked a lot about what the players get and the backstory of the world, but I don't want to completely ignore the GM. I mean, that's in any of these games. It's a big job to be a GM, and anyone who's run a game knows, like, you gotta You got to have an idea of where you're going, and some people are lucky enough to just run games off the top of their head and it works out. But a lot of us, we have to plan this stuff out, manage monsters, manage loot, all that kind of stuff. It's a big job. And one of the systems that we put in place, one of the tools that we wanted to give GMs was a good, solid monster creation system. And instead of just, we have a list of pre-made monsters, but we wanted to give them a way to come up with their own that fit better into whatever story they were telling. So we came up with something that we call the mastermind system. And we mentioned this briefly on the Kickstarter, but basically the GM at character generation sits down with the players and builds their own character that is the mastermind, or the big bad evil guy, if you will.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they start right when the players do, and they continue to gain in power as the players do, but at a greater rate. They get more XP per session and things like that. So you kind of build this final boss for them to fight. And then all of your monsters that you can create are derived from your mastermind stat line. So as you build this one thing, you can just say, okay, I want to build a grunt, which is kind of like your low-level meat shield kind of monster. It's 50% of whatever my mastermind stats are, and that's their base stat line. And it goes up from there. So it allows you to create monsters very quickly, very efficiently, without giving up a whole lot of time to coming up with attacks and abilities and all this sort of stuff.
That's awesome. That's a really great feature. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for being on the show. The Shattered is currently funding on Kickstarter, and I think everyone should go check it out. Again, guys, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
No, thank you, man.
Thank you for having us.
Many thanks to Josh, Alex, and Corey for being on the show. The Shattered is fully funded on Kickstarter, and there is a week and a half left to unlock some stretch goals. There are so many unique and creative features in this game, so do yourself a favor and check out The Shattered on Kickstarter. For more interviews with game designers, visit www.tabletoptorch.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @TabletopTorch. If you are a game designer who would like to be featured on Startup Gamers Podcast, please send an email to matt@tabletoptorch.com. As always, I am your host, Matt Ballard. You can find me on Twitter @NerdUnfiltered. I'll be back in a few days with more exciting interviews with the best game designers out there. Till then, go play some games.